New controls. Okay, so we are recording. So welcome to Indian Education for All across the content. This session is with Scott Prinzing, who is a teacher extraordinaire out in Pryor and has done many amazing things with Indian education and music since I have known him, which has been over a decade. So for many years. I will be posting in the chat some of our common resources. And of course, I will make sure that the link to all of our music resources and any additional resources that Scott will share this evening in the YouTube video. With all of our YouTube videos, please make sure to look at the descriptions. The link for the renewal unit survey is right in the description. So, and if there is a video where the presenter has shared any resources, I will also make sure to include a link to those resources in the description. So make sure to check those out. These are all recorded for posterity and future use, but understanding everyone's really busy schedules, whether you're here live, thank you so much. Yay. Jody and Dina are here. Thank you for being here. And for those of you watching the recording, just delighted that you are able to see this great the strategies and the content that are happening. So Scott, with that, take it away.
All right. Well, I just want to make sure I just opening, excuse me, the wrong file. I'll get to that later. I may or may not, depending on how time goes, play a few excerpts. Let's see, am I showing? Is my camera on? There we go. Okay. So normally when I do presentations about American Indian music, the most ideal time that I had once is, I think at MEA one year I had a 3-hour slot, which was wonderful. I like to do 90 minutes and then I can race everything in. I once gave a 20-minute presentation, which was just like had my heart racing and trying to do it. So I tried to pare down and do an outline to do this one, excuse me, in the allotted time. So we'll do our best. I made an outline. This is your handout. You can have outline with some general times, so I can keep myself in time. So I don't know if, I think the link that Jennifer just posted is years ago I did a handbook or curriculum guide, I don't know what you'd call it really, for the Indian Ed department at OPI. And I was honored to be able to do so. I was asked by Mike Jetty, I think is who asked me. And it might even have been, I can't remember. I think it might have been after Everell Fox, but I met Mike through Everell Fox, who I think was the first Indian Ed director, if I recall. Any case, what I did try to do was based on my knowledge at the time, which of course, being an educator, you understand that you're always adding to that knowledge base. My background in music is a lifelong musician and a lifelong music fan with little to almost no formal training. So I play by ear. I play a few different instruments. My wife and I have a musical duo, and we've recorded 3 CDs. But, when he asked me to do a presentation, I said, well, I have a lot of knowledge and I can try and arrange it all. And basically came out that they couldn't find anyone else who had a better grasp of the topic than I did. And so I was lucky enough to get to do that. So I called my presentation initially More Than Just Drums and Flutes. And I was never really comfortable with that title because to me it always sounded like it was a little dismissive of traditional and even to this day important music of Indigenous people that utilized especially the drum, but then also the flute. So I later revised it and changed it to even more than drums and flutes. And that's where I ended up now. So a lot of times when I would give presentations, I used to do this with Humanities Montana. For about 8 years, I was part of their speakers bureau, travel all over the state. Sometimes you would have people there who were knowledgeable about music, sometimes about American Indian culture, sometimes a little bit about music or individual musicians. But right off the bat, I started getting questions, a few that I could almost always count on being asked about. So I decided I was going to just cover that in my intro and so that people don't have to ask those same questions. But one is, I am not Native myself. I have a lifelong interest that started when I was probably in about kindergarten, and the year between kindergarten and first grade, where my family went to Mount Rushmore, and there were some Native dancers and drummers and singers as an exhibition, and that really sparked my interest there to see real live Indians instead of just in movies. I mean, they were just like characters to me. They could have been like Keystone Cops or leprechauns. I don't know. They were. I didn't realize that, or at least something from history. And here were, real Native people. And that fall, my family, were moving to Massachusetts, and my mother her mother was a direct descendant from the Winslows and the Mayflower and the Pilgrims and so forth. So we went on the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower, and the first they did, like, for the week of Thanksgiving, a whole bunch of activities in Plymouth, and we went there. And one of the things that we saw was the American Indian movement occupying Plymouth Rock and holding a rally. And that night, they actually came and poured a bucket of red paint over Plymouth Rock, and it was in the news and everything. So here I am, 6 years old. I just saw these beautiful, fascinating traditional dancers, and then I see these angry contemporary natives in blue jeans and cowboy hats and dressed pretty much like anybody else. Maybe they had braids, but I don't remember the details, but it was just fascinating that here were real live Indians doing more traditional seeming things and doing more modern contemporary things. So that really kind of sparked my interest early on. And whenever I had to do a book report or read a biography or something in school, I'd always read, Sitting Bull or Geronimo or Pocahontas. We had a whole shelf full of biographies in my third grade class, and there were about 4 or 5 that were about dealing with Native people. So those are the first ones I read. But anyway, bringing up to the current time, I had a radio show on Yellowstone Public Radio about Montana music, which started. I had a local music column in the Free Weekly in Billings about the Billings music scene, and I had contacted Everett Fox about finding out if there might be some way I could contribute and help with Indian Education for All, and he latched onto the music thing because they didn't really have any materials. They had already gathered and developed a lot of materials, but they didn't have anything really directly with music. And I said, well, I can tell you about contemporary music. I can speak about traditional Native music, but I don't know very much about it, and it wouldn't be a good idea. So that's what brought me up to that point. So the questions I get asked are if I'm Native, and like I said, I'm not. I even got my DNA tested once, and the best I could do is I tell people I found out I was 2.5% Neanderthal and 2% Denisovan, which I guess a lot of American Indians have Denisovan in their DNA history. But mine, I think, came from like, I don't know, Eastern Europe or something. And that's besides the point. But what I do like to do, the other thing is that I get asked questions about is I like to put my definitions out there because someone will inevitably ask, you know, are we supposed to say American Indian, Native American? Are we supposed to say in Europe, a lot of places they say Red Indian when they refer to American Indians. And then they'll sometimes in Native circles, I've heard people joke, are you a feather Indian or a dot Indian? So, you know, Eastern Indians, you know, who have a bindi in their forehead. But what I tell people, the way that I've come to use the terminology is when I use the term American Indian, for me, I think of the original people in the contiguous United States and their descendants. I think of those as American Indians when I'm presenting. And then I'll use the term Native American basically for the original people and their descendants of North America and the outlying islands associated with it, you know. So, you know, we'll be more specific and you can talk about the different cultural regions, and you can talk about Alaska natives, Native Hawaiians, and so forth. But whenever possible, your best bet is if you know someone's tribal affiliation or where they're enrolled, how they self-identify, that's the best term to use. And I, you know, I try and find that out. A lot of times, it's even better if you can find out what people from any given tribe call themselves in their own language, because it's usually different than what everyone else knows them as. And there's a whole presentation that you could do about that. And there are some, I'm sure. But in any case, for instance, the Crow tribe, they will still refer to themselves as Crow Indians. The official name of the reservation is the Crow Indian Reservation. And, but they call themselves Upsalika, meaning the children of the large beak bird. And I know OPI has materials where you can, whether or not you have heard that before, you can go to the website and find out the naming and misnaming of all the tribes in Montana. And so I'm going to stress that as an educator here in Montana, one of the most important resources we have, I think, whatever subject you teach, is the Indian Ed for All program. The first of its kind, and still, even though I think other states have tried to model similar programs based, it's really Montana, and with our mandate in our Constitution that every student should learn about the history of Montana, its original people. And so the framework for all those resources are, as many people know, the essential understandings, the 7 essential understandings regarding Montana Indians. And I think it says Indians on the materials. And, you know, some American Indian people will prefer to use just the term native, not even Native American. You know, it's just, we're just native. We're native to this continent. Well, of the 7 essential understandings, the one that I stress, or that is in my kind of, what's the word? The standard that I teach to, that I focus on, is essential understanding number 2, which each of these have a small phrase, but I'll read the actual language. Was just as there is great diversity among tribal nations, there is great diversity among individual American Indians as identity is developed, defined, and redefined by entities, organizations, and people. There is no generic American Indian. So when I tell my students, I teach at Plenty Coups High School. I teach a Native American Studies class. My undergraduate, I didn't mention that. My undergraduate degree is in American Indian Studies from University of Minnesota. And one of the things that I bond with Mike Jetty about is my second language was Dakota. So I studied Dakota for 2 languages. So I get more of his jokes maybe than some people do the first time around. And I don't know, I'm catching up though. I know probably almost as many Cheyenne phrases and Crow phrases and words that I learned in my 2 years of college study. But in any case, when I'm talking, I'm watching my time here. I got to keep moving. The first group of contemporary American Indians as musicians that I like to talk about are those who are kind of the forerunners. They're probably the most influential, and not only influential and inspiring to other Native musicians, but to contemporary musicians at large. And when I do my presentation, I'll usually try and play. I'll cover almost twice as many as I'll mention here today, but they're all listed in the materials in the handbook. And I'll play musical excerpts, but I think because of the time, it's more important to, you can explore those on your own, and I can give you some places to look and what to look for. But I want to talk about each of these. The very first contemporary, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. There are others that were influential in different ways, but maybe came before the era of recording popular music. As you know, right now, I talk about the last century of music, and really the first notable American Indian artist is a jazz singer named Mildred Bailey. Mildred Bailey. I'm looking around for my book here. I should have grabbed that, but Mildred Bailey, I may find it before we're done here, was a jazz singer. She was a member of the Spokane tribe. I think she spent a lot of her life growing up in Seattle, but would maybe spend her summers on the Spokane reservation. And she grew up singing traditional Spokane music and hearing that in the background. And she claimed that really influenced her jazz singing and kind of the way she would kind of slide her vocals, and it came from that background. And she started singing in Seattle as a jazz singer with like the big bands who of the big band era were usually more often than not known for the band leader, whether it was, Glenn Miller or Duke Ellington, whoever was the head of the band, and their solo instrument was the predominant instrument, and they would perform, and they would often have a featured vocalist who maybe would just step up and sing one verse or one chorus. Nowadays, we think of the vocalist as being most important, and then you might have a little 8 bars of a solo instrument, depending on the genre. Could be guitar, it could be fiddle, saxophone, piano. And she got started that way, but then she started recording single songs and became very successful and influential to where there were records that were released with her name as the main featured artist, and with, this band, instead of this band featuring Mildred Bailey as the singer. Um, when A lot of people don't know of her. A lot of jazz singers maybe don't know of her, but the reason she's so important is because she was influential. And I can tell you the whole story, but we don't have time. So I'll just tell you that she's very influential in the life and music careers of both Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra as a friend and a mentor. So much so that the end of her life, which she died young, she had diabetes, and I think she was about 44 when she passed. And she was destitute at that time because she'd had some issues with alcohol and substance abuse, I think, as a lot of musicians and jazz musicians at that time, in particular, had those problems. But her hospital bills, when she was in the hospital, and I think maybe even her internment costs and so forth, were covered predominantly by Frank Sinatra, but also Bing Crosby. So Bing Crosby was probably the most directly influenced, because when he was about 19 years old, he was in a duo with Mildred Bailey's younger brother. And I think that maybe a cousin, or there was a third one who maybe was a instrumentalist. I can't remember the details, but she mentored them, and she shared her record collection, and she taught them how to do harmonies and scat singing and things like that. Ella Fitzgerald had referred to her as an influence. So remarkable lady. Mildred Bailey, there's no footage, like video or film, that I know of her. There's some YouTube videos, but they mostly just have static images or like kind of a slideshow. Anyway, so she's huge. Jumping ahead a decade or two, is a guitar player, also a singer-songwriter, but predominantly known for his guitar playing, named Link Wray, who started out really in the 40s, playing kind of country and rockabilly with his brothers in a group. And he just played guitar, and one brother sang. And he went away, and he was from North Carolina and was a member of the Shawnee tribe. I should say I don't know like his enrollment status. I'm guessing he probably was, because it was that era. If your mother was a member of the tribe, you probably were too, even though I think his father was not native. And he grew up, in rural North Carolina, and they were, pretty poor, and the family ended up relocating to the DC area. And I think that was after he had served in the military, in which he got tuberculosis in Germany and lost one of his lungs in surgery. And they told him he'd probably never sing again. Well, he was mainly a guitar player, but he's a good singer too. And he's a little kind of a little rougher edged Elvis Presley in his style. And he considered Elvis an influence and so forth. Contemporary though. And Link Wray came to be known for his first hit. His first record that he released was his biggest hit. Sometimes happens to people. But he wasn't really a one-hit wonder, because he had a few other top 40 hits. But he also continued writing, recording, and performing until, I think, about 5 months before he died in his 70s. So, I mean, he was still touring. He was bigger and more successful in Europe than in the United States. But he had this song called Rumble. I don't know if you've heard of the documentary called Rumble about contemporary American Indian musicians, but it came out a few years ago, and it takes its title from his song, and his picture is, and the imagery, the advertising for it. But he wrote this pretty much like a 3-chord instrumental in the late 50s. Instrumentals were real popular. And his was called Rumble. It was more because of the sound of it, but because in that era there were movies about teenage gangs and things, coming after West Side Story and the Wild Bunch and um, Rebel Without a Cause, and they kind of jumped onto that bandwagon. And his later on, his look became kind of as like the black leather rebel, but he had the distinction of his instrumental being banned on like half of the radio stations in America, or at least half that would have been played on, for teenage music, because programmers feared this song called Rumble would inspire the youth to, join gangs and fight in the streets and, be juvenile delinquents, even though there were no words in the song. It was, but because they think of a rumble as a street fight. And I tell my students, okay, here's the deal. We're going to release a song, and the most important thing for you to know about it is you are not allowed to hear it. What's the first thing they're all going to do? How do I hear that song? Where do I get a copy of it? As a result, Rumble was the first million-selling instrumental song in the rock and roll era, of rock and roll music. And his whole career came after that. The song, he had originally called it Oddball, and the daughter of the engineer or producer in the studio who recorded it said something like either it sounds like the speakers are rumbling or it sound, something like that. And they gave it the name Rumble. So Link Ray and these next two I'm going to mention are the three that I know the most about. Robbie Robertson, I could probably speak for 90 minutes just about Robbie Robertson and not even really do him justice. He was a member of the Six Nations Reserve in Canada, as a member of the Mohawk tribe. He initially started out when he was a teenager playing in this rockabilly band. When he was 15, they recorded 2 songs he'd written. The band was called Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. Ronnie Hawkins was from Oklahoma, but he went up to Canada, so he was kind of like a exotic, real American performer. So even though, he might not have been that great or that original, he was kind of a novelty there. And playing in Toronto, Robbie's mother was a fan, and he ended up hearing them and hanging around. And by the time he was 16, he joined the band as a bass player. He was a guitar player. He'd never played bass, but he didn't tell them that. He figured he could play bass and figured it out. And I think within a year or two, he was the primary guitar player in that band, and they had quite a bit of success. When he was listed in Rolling Stone magazine's like top 100 guitar players of all time, they referenced Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks recording of "Who Do You Love," which is an old blues song. I want to say maybe, I think it might have been Bo Diddley who originally wrote it, but recorded it. But they had a hit with it. And his guitar solo, this is in 1964, and they said in Rolling Stone magazine, there was no one who played that raw and that frantic and like that long of a guitar solo in a song anywhere in 1964. and he was probably, I'm thinking, 18 or 19 at the time. Later on, other musicians, referenced him and were fans of him. Probably his biggest fan was Eric Clapton. They later became close friends. And at one point later in life, when he was, I'm jumping ahead again here, but this band that he was in, and they left Ronnie Hawkins and tried to make it on their own as just the Hawks. And when Bob Dylan decided he wanted to go do an electric tour, he'd already done like an electric performance or two, like at the Newport Folk Festival, and caused a big stir with I'm drawing a blank on the name, the band that backed him up. It'll come to me. But they didn't want to go on tour with him. They were doing their own thing. And so someone recommended the band, or the Hawks, and he went and saw them and got him on as his backing band. And they toured doing the famous Notorious Electric tour of Bob Dylan in 1965, I believe. And anyway, Bob Dylan had a motorcycle accident, was out of commission for a year and a half, which is like a lifetime back then in popular music. And they just went out on their own, and they called themselves The Band, because people always refer to them, Bob Dylan's backing band. Oh, aren't you in the band? And they originally were going to call themselves the Crackers, but they couldn't find a record label that would release their stuff under that name. And so they became the band. Robbie Robertson was kind of the undisputed main songwriter and musical director of the band, even though he only sang a couple of their songs, lead vocals ever. He kind of orchestrated the three other main singers in the band. And as a result, the music they created, a lot of people kind of refer to them as the originators of what has become known as Americana, where they took, even though they were all Canadian except for the drummer who was from Oklahoma, they kind of drew on American traditional music, blues, folk, jazz, gospel, and also the great pop singers of the earlier era, the Frank Sinatra's, Bing Crosby's, and so forth. And they kind of jumbled it all together, but instead of making a coherent sound, it was kind of uniquely them. And they were very successful. Their biggest hits were probably Up on Cripple Creek and The Weight. When they finally called it a day as a touring act, they had a big concert called The Last Waltz. And they had all these different guest artists who were friends and played with them, people from who were influences. They had, from the blues, Muddy Waters was there. Bob Dylan performed. Ronnie Hawkins, their mentor when they were starting out. Dr. John from New Orleans, they recorded down in New Orleans one time. And Joni Mitchell and Neil Young from Canada. Ringo Starr from the Beatles. Robbie Robertson is one of the only people to have, I'm mixing him up. He did some recording with Ringo, and I think was friends with George Harrison. But anyway, very influential. The next really influential guitar player, though, is Jesse Ed Davis.
Wait, before you move on, you got to talk about Robbie Robertson's nomination.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm just, okay. So Robbie Robertson, I thought I had my book right here, but I'll have to just mention it. Anyway, Robbie Robertson he's been nominated for various things before, but he just, are you thinking for Killers of the Flower Moon? Yeah. So after the movie Last Waltz was done, and Robbie Robertson did a lot, they interviewed him a lot. He was obviously the most eloquent speaker, the best storyteller. I mean, he wrote these great songs. And Martin Scorsese, who produced the documentary, developed a friendship with him and ended up using him as the musical director for almost every film he ever made. I mean, I don't know how many he did, but at least a dozen of his major films. Sometimes he would do original music or incidental music. Other times he just was kind of the what would you call it? The archivist who would, pull together the right song for the right scene, and was really recognized for that. Well, he passed away just shortly before Killers of the Flower Moon was released, and which, and I can't remember our guest. What is your first name again? Yes, I can't tell from your. Starts with a J, I'm guessing.
I'm Jody.
Jody. Okay, Jody. Jody, if you've seen Killers of the Flower Moon at all, or have read the book.
I have not yet, but I want to.
Okay. It should be on your bucket list. It's not, neither of them are easy to get through, but they're very important and very well done. Not to put you on the spot, but anyway, Robbie Robertson was nominated for an Academy Award for the music direction for that film, which, included some indigenous music as well as incidental music and orchestral music and whatnot. And sadly, he passed away before that nomination. But any case, I realized I have about a third of my time left and about half of my talk to go. So I'm gonna try and speed it up. Like I said, I could talk about Robbie Robertson for the whole time probably, or this next guy, Jesse Ed Davis, who was a studio guitar player, who actually, when he was a teenager and about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years younger than Robbie Robertson, used to go see the Hawks perform when they'd come down to Oklahoma, and he'd stand right down front just in awe when he learned that Robbie Robertson was native. Because Robbie Robertson's half Jewish, he maybe didn't look native right off the bat. His birth name was his father's last name was Claterman, and he took Robertson. His father died when he was 3 or 4 years old, and he was adopted by his stepfather, whose last name was Robertson, and so that's how he got that name. But Robbie Robertson, which that sounds like a cool rock and roll name anyway, Robbie Robertson. And just like Jesse Ed Davis, his middle name is Edwin. Well, that doesn't sound as cool as Jesse Ed, and being from the South, you often get your first and middle name combined. But Jesse Ed Davis was more of what you might think of as a full blood Indian, in that both parents were native, and he was primarily connected or identified with the Kiowa on one side and Comanche on the other, but he has ancestry in like 4 or 5 tribes, and one of them being the Seminole. And he had a grandmother, it was either grandmother or great grandmother, I think it was his grandmother, was the first female leader of the Seminole. I don't know if they used the term chief or president, or I think she was the chief of the Seminole tribe. So he was really best known as a studio musician. He started out, he was friends with, these other Oklahoma musicians like Leon Russell, and Taj Mahal, who he played in Taj Mahal's band for a few years. And when the Rolling Stones did this TV show, which wasn't broadcast because they weren't happy with it and it sat on the shelves for decades, but it was called the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And the Who were on it. And they had a group that was kind of a mishmash of a few different players from the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and whatnot that played on it. Jethro Tull played on it, but also I think it was in about 1970 or 71, they had Taj Mahal because they wanted this authentic American blues man who's African-American. Taj Mahal primarily sings and plays harmonica, but Jesse Ed Davis was his guitar player. And Europeans have often been really interested or fascinated with American Indian people. And so they were like, they couldn't believe this blues, this bottleneck blues guitar player, slide guitar player was an American Indian. Well, this is what I was going to say before about Robbie Robertson, but Jesse Ed Davis ended up being, as far as I know, one of the only people to have performed in their solo careers with all four members of the Beatles. He recorded with on solo albums, a couple of them with George Harrison and on John Lennon's rock and roll album, and one or two with Ringo Starr. But he also, during John Lennon's Lost Weekend period of his life, once was part of a jam with Paul McCartney and John Lennon. I think Harry Nilsson and Ringo might even have been a part of it. And maybe Keith Moon from The Who. But anyway, there's some bootleg recordings I've heard. They sound terrible, just like tinny, but what an honor. But anyway, he played on a lot of recordings of people that you may have heard or haven't heard, Leon Russell, Dr. John, Rita Coolidge, who's also, I didn't make my list for this talk, but she's Cherokee and a Grammy award-winning singer. But I'll use that to segue quick into this next section, which is a lot about more famous American Indian. Robbie Robertson's famous, but he's not a household name. People know the band. They're familiar with his songs. They might say, Robbie Robertson, he's that guy. Where have I heard that name? But Buffy St. Marie was a folk singer in the 60s who came out, who really was considered and stood head and shoulders up against the big names, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez. She was a contemporary of theirs. She also has continued to do music throughout her career. She's had an unfortunate incident in the last year or so where some people were questioning her native identity, which, it's a bit absurd. It's unfair because Canada has this history it's different than the American boarding school history, but it's some ways it's even more devastating, which happened up through the 1960s, where they were ripping children away from their families and adopting them out. At least if your kids go to a boarding school, you might know where you could find them or how you could get them back. But if they change your name and you're adopted out, and those records are sealed. So Buffy St. Marie was raised, I think in part by a non-native family, but she knew her whole life that she was native and what tribe she was affiliated with, which was Cree. But, it's kind of the damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's American Indians and Canadian First Nations, you have to prove that you're a minority person, where in America, it used to be if they found out you had one drop of African ancestry, you were labeled black, and it was like a curse, because of course you'd be prohibited from all kinds of opportunities and advancements, whether starting a business or owning property or whatnot, and the redlining and all that. Well, American Indians, during the reorganization era, tribes had to develop a way to determine who was going to be an enrolled member or not. And so a lot of tribes use blood quantum, other tribes use descent, and some tribes it's just maternal descent. Others it's either parent. If your parent was a tribal member, you are automatically. But so she kind of got, all of a sudden it's like she didn't have the paperwork to prove she was who she'd been her whole life. There's been some hoo-ha in academia where there've been some very successful academics who've been in a similar situation, and some politicians, and different people have had different success proving that. And it's just crazy that there's this way to prove whether or not you're native, and whether or not you are affiliated with a tribe. And if you go on OPI's YouTube page, you can find a lot of great resources about that whole issue too. Any case, Buffy Sainte-Marie, she's also a Grammy winner for having written a song that was Academy Award Song of the Year, Up Where We Belong, from Officer and a Gentleman or something like, I can't even remember. But and I think I was going to say Robbie Robertson, that song he wrote called The Wait for the band, it's been recorded like 200 times by different people, including, I think, Aretha Franklin. Well, Buffy Sainte-Marie's had her song recorded by lots of people, including some big names. I almost want to say, I don't know when she wrote it or if it was a different song, but I feel like Elvis recorded one of her songs. So, I mean, there you go. Okay,
Hey,
really
Scott,
quick.
So
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt, but since we
No,
only
please.
have 8 minutes,
I know.
we only have 8 minutes left, I could listen to you all day. I'm just
I
grinning
could too.
because
I could listen to you.
if my dad could be here, and I feel like he is in many ways, just because of this joy, but he would love this talk. And so, but anyhow, since we only have a few minutes left, could you give us some strategies for classroom implementation, and then maybe we can open up for questions?
Yes. What I and I had a few other people I wanted to talk about, but we got the main point. Other than I just want to mention
Redbone. Let's see. Yeah, throw out Redbone.
Redbone, and Come and Get Your Love. Which, did you hear the story on NPR this morning? There was a 7-minute story about Redbone on NPR this morning. I played it for my classes just last.
I'll have to post it.
Yeah, but anyway, Jody, if you've ever seen Guardians of the Galaxy, their song "Come and Get Your Love," that's how the kids know the song. But I mean, I remember it was a big hit when I was a kid. But anyway, and then I talk about there's some Montana artists. Well, I noticed that Jennifer shared the link for my Even More Than Drums and Flutes site, where I think you did. Did that come up at one point, or was that the handbook? Anyway, I did 5 video profiles about Montana native musicians that are on there, and there's others that aren't included that I know of as well, but that's a place to look. And then this book that I wrote a chapter in about those 3 guitar players, Link Ray, Robbie Robertson, and Jesse Ed Davis. The book is called Indigenous Pop, and the subheading is Native American Music from Jazz to Hip Hop, and it's on University of Arizona Press, and covers a lot of different genres and from the last century. And that book is still available. It's about $35, but I looked it up recently and found one for about $19.99 on Amazon used. Anyway, that's a great resource. I don't get anything from it. I just like to promote it. And then I was just going to mention that the Native American Music Association, they have a website. They do annual awards, the NAMMYs. The Grammys started to have a Native category as well. But for teaching strategies, I find that kind of looking at the personal biographies of some of these musicians and showing the diverse backgrounds they came from all across America and Canada, different genres of music and different adversities that they had, and things that obstacles they had to overcome. But also, sadly, there's a few of them who had tragic endings, and partly because of either at the time or past substance abuse issues, like Mildred Bailey and Jesse Ed Davis, which you could kind of use as kind of a warning story. I also have people like in the videos, Jared Stewart, who's Crow, and Superman both talk about having either quit their substance or alcohol use, or having really made that a point of who they are and making a stance. Like Superman really incorporates that in his presentations about being drug and alcohol free. At the same time, you'll have someone like Gary Small, who's Northern Cheyenne blues rock player, who I couldn't believe I interviewed him for this video, and he's wearing a t-shirt with like a label of some vodka or whiskey or something. I mean, he plays in bars. I didn't even think of it, but I didn't draw attention to it. But what I like to do is sometimes with those videos, assign different students to view them and to report back to the class. Try and find out what they can. I always tell them that Wikipedia is an okay place to start, because you can find a lot of good links if you go down to the footnotes. But when you're dealing just with historical facts that aren't, no one's going to wonder if, did Link Ray really have a song called Rumble? Well, you can find it in numerous places, but you can find a lot more about him there. But I feel like, Jody, I'm sorry I'd left so little time, but I'd like to give you a chance to ask a question, if you have any, or Jennifer, if you have any.
And we have Dana from Billings, who's on her phone as well.
Oh,
and
welcome, Dana.
I just want to ask quickly, Dana, do you want me to send you these links tomorrow, like last time? And
Yeah.
Jody, jump right
Yeah,
in.
that works for me.
Okay, I will definitely do that. So I'm going to go ahead and actually stop the recording. So for just a moment, I'm going to say thank you so much, Scott, for this awesome presentation. I want to listen to like another hour, like on Redbone on. So thank you.
And I wish I could play excerpts. You can see why a 3-hour block